On today's video, we're going to go across the country on Interstate 10, starting in California and ending in Jacksonville, Florida. Interstate 10 starts in Santa Monica roughly, and it goes all the way across the United States, ending in Jacksonville Beach, connecting the beaches of the Pacific to the beaches of the Atlantic. In between, there are deserts, mountains, and swamps. Let's go on this journey from one coast of the country to the other and discover what lies along Interstate 10. Santa Monica, California, one of the most exclusive addresses on the West Coast. This is where our journey begins. These iconic beaches are the home of celebrities. Perhaps all you hear today about this coast of California is the wild homeless situation that California is facing. However, on the western end of Interstate 10 are some of the most exclusive addresses in the United States. With nearly perfect weather, the key attraction to California, nestled among these winding mountainside roads, you have addresses like Beverly Hills and Calabasas, some of the most desirable locations to live in the United States, where real estate prices reflect the desirability of these areas. Above the mountain, luxurious homes dominate, and at the bottom, some of the most exclusive shopping venues you'll find, with the most expensive name brands, a place to be really seen. This is the ambiance of Santa Monica and the adjacent communities that mark the start of today's journey. As we get on Interstate 10 and leave behind the beautiful coastline, we run into the large city of Los Angeles. From the oldest McDonald's still in operation to some of the most vibrant Latino communities in the United States, Los Angeles is packed with culture, an urban landscape that is known throughout the entire world for its unique street and urban influences. The culture of Los Angeles exported throughout the entire world, like the Mexican-American lowriding scene, which started here on the streets of East Los Angeles, known to the locals as East Los, and today can be found throughout the entire world in places like Japan. The urban subcultures of Los Angeles have global influence. The images of Los Angeles Skid Row, right outside of downtown, were known throughout the entire world. These homeless camps in the adjacent area of Interstate 10 in downtown Los Angeles are today images that the entire world has seen. But you have to remember that the Los Angeles greater metropolitan area is home to over 18 million people. In comparison, the state of Florida only has 22 million people. Imagine if roughly all the homeless people in Florida were congregated in one single place. In that situation, we could assume that the homeless camp in Florida, if it were all in one place, would by far be of larger scale than Los Angeles Skid Row. So while the scale of Los Angeles Skid Row may seem overwhelming to some people, proportionate to the size of the metropolitan area, it's about what you'd get anywhere else. Perhaps you've seen my video series of homeless camps in Florida. Imagine if all the homeless camps in Florida, except for the Florida Panhandle, were all congregated in one single place. It would be as big, if not bigger, than Los Angeles Skid Row. And thus, while the scale of the Los Angeles metropolitan area may make these homeless camps look massive or humongous, it is actually proportionate to the population of the metropolitan area, and thus, despite the fame that this area has, it is actually considerably safer than many other homeless encampments throughout the country. While in Los Angeles, we parked our vehicle in Skid Row on a dark alleyway for roughly 30 minutes to see if somebody would approach us or bother us, and absolutely nobody did. Nonetheless, it is an embarrassment to the city of Los Angeles that in the shadow of its skyscrapers is one of the largest homeless encampments in North America. Yet this really shouldn't define your image of Los Angeles. It's a great metropolitan area. We move on to Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat here is unbearable. Many of the shopping malls are even going to have underground parking so people can have a cool place to park their vehicles. The air circulation is also limited, which means that breathing in Phoenix is kind of difficult. I would say if it wasn't for the difficult air circulation and, of course, the problematic air quality, this actually would be one of the greatest cities to live in the United States. Phoenix has a very low violent crime rate, a very low homicide rate, and it is scenically one of the most beautiful cities you'll find anywhere in the United States. With suburbs like Scottsdale, Mesa, you'll find that even the suburbs are among some of the safest cities in the United States. Phoenix overall is a huge metropolitan area, and it really is a safe and beautiful place to be. With scenic desert settings, tall palm trees, lots of new construction, very well maintained highways and roads, lots of new building and growth, Phoenix is in the Sun Belt, and it does benefit from the growth that this region of the country has. Due to the desert temperatures, you'll notice lots of underground parking and many shaded parking areas, something you perhaps won't see anywhere else in the United States. Phoenix enjoys a very good highway system, and as you drive on Interstate 10 through Phoenix, it's a very enjoyable drive. The width, size, and expansive footprint of the highway network makes it a joy and a breeze to fly through a very large metropolitan area. The suburb of Mesa alone has over 500,000 people, making it the 37th largest city in the United States. Apache Junction and many other scenic trails on the outskirts. You go from desert settings to snow-capped mountains as you head into Tucson. The West doesn't just have its own unique landscape, it also has its own unique architecture that fairly well complements the natural settings. And if you enjoy looking at homes in different neighborhoods, going around places in the Tucson area will definitely be enjoyable for you, as you'll get to see that the architecture perfectly complements the beautiful desert backdrops. Tucson really is an incredible city to drive through, and on Interstate 10, you'll get a beautiful view, the vastness of the West and its deserts. We enter El Paso, Texas. On the outskirts of El Paso, you'll notice a small suburb of Canutillo. While El Paso, Texas is one of the safest cities in the United States, this particular suburb has been plagued with high homicides. Right across the border in Mexico is Ciudad Juarez, which until recently was the most dangerous city in the world. With thousands of people losing their lives every single year on the streets of Juarez, it's incredible to think that just one wall separates one of the safest places in the United States, El Paso, Texas, from what was one of the most dangerous cities in the world, Ciudad Juarez. Currently, Tijuana, across from San Diego, holds that title, but nonetheless, Ciudad Juarez continues to be a very dangerous city. And in fact, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez are literally, if you look from a Google map, one single metropolitan area. Interstate 10, the only major highway that crosses the city, goes east to west across El Paso, taking you from a beautiful view of the entire metropolitan area. Despite its size, El Paso is a very busy city. The highways and the roads here, despite the fact they're vast and massive for the size of El Paso, remain busy all the time. As the name in Spanish would suggest, El Paso is a passage, an area that is constantly busy with traffic. And once again, we have to correct the narrative that the media portrays about El Paso, Texas. While literally some neighborhoods in El Paso look like they're literally in Mexico, even they're on this side of the border, the migrant crisis here is not as bad as depicted. When we visited El Paso, there was news on Fox News and many other news media saying that there was crowds of people in the streets of El Paso. We stayed right in downtown El Paso overlooking the border. We even talked to border agent spokespersons who told us the reality of the situation. And the reality was that it was being vastly exaggerated by the media. While today the situation is changing and there are more migrants crossing, at the time of these videos were taken, there was definitely an element of exaggeration, if not outright misleading, when it came to the reporting of the real situation. Driving through Sonora, western Texas, we find an arid climate as we approach the area of Midland and Odessa, an outright wasteland of oil production. This region of Texas is arid and massive, but eventually, when you get to about Junction, Texas, the green opens up again, and now you have a new landscape. Lush landscaping green appears once again. The rolling hills of the west continue with beautiful scenic western views. However, these landscapes start to become dotted with more green. You leave behind the yellow, arid areas of western Texas, and now you enter a region of Texas that feels more green. It feels more lively. The small towns here have a slow speed of life. Junction, Texas will be one of the first towns as you head eastbound where you start to see beautiful green vegetation, a welcome sight after being out west. As we continue our journey on Interstate 10 heading east, we headed towards the direction of San Antonio. Beautiful rolling hills, small towns nestled among the greenery, somewhat similar to Appalachia in landscape and terrain, but a little bit drier, a little bit warmer. This is Central Texas. Interstate 10 through this region of Texas really is a joy, with scenic displays of nature in all directions. For many miles, it really is one of the most enjoyable drives in the entire voyage of Interstate 10. As you approach San Antonio, it becomes even more beautiful. Interestingly, once you cross east of Interstate 35, the beautiful green landscape disappears once again for a short period until you reach the Houston area. The drive into San Antonio is scenic. San Antonio is one of the largest cities in the United States by population. In this region, property taxes are somewhat heavy, and thus land value is almost insignificant. As the property taxes are so high, investing in land here doesn't make a lot of sense. San Antonio has a massive highway system. The city is busy, it is very fluent in traffic, and it's a great place to stop and get some authentic food. San Antonio is known as having some of the best food of any American city, predominantly being over 40% Hispanic. The Mexican food here is world renowned. What most travelers will tell you about San Antonio immediately is how great the Mexican American cuisine here is. The city also has a very massive and expansive highway system, so if you enjoy driving through cities, San Antonio is definitely a treat. The small town of Seguin, Texas, just to the east of San Antonio, you start to enter small rural towns that have somewhat of a southern vibe. As is customary for much of Texas, large pickup trucks drive through these small towns. Columbus, Texas. You're now between San Antonio and Houston, but it starts to feel similar to the Deep South. Abandoned, slow-paced towns, somewhat a slow speed of life. Despite the fact you are way in Texas, it really feels like this region has a lot in common with the Deep South. From the small town vibes, the slow speed of life, everything here will remind you literally of the Deep South. In Columbus, Texas, a comical sign reminds truckers that if they hit this sign, they'll hit Interstate 10. Even behind San Antonio, we're now headed on Interstate 10 straight for Houston, Texas, one of the largest metroplexes in the country. On the outskirts, small towns like Sealy. These towns try to hold on to their small town feels because the menacing growth of Houston is slowly approaching. Very soon, these towns on the far outskirts of Houston will one day be nothing more than just another suburb of the city. As Houston grows and expands, these towns on the outskirts have to struggle with the notion that one day they will literally be swallowed by the growth of Houston. As we enter Houston, we find a Buc-ee's gas station. Again, a very diverse region of Texas. Houston has more diversity than any other city in the South. Only Atlanta can compete. Katy, Texas is considered one of the most diverse communities in the United States, and as Interstate 10 enters what's known as the Katy Expressway, heading towards the western part of Houston, Texas, you have what is said to be the widest stretch of highway in the entire world. Yes, Interstate 10 has a stretch through Houston that is considered by many to be the widest stretch of road anywhere on Earth. While there's a few other highways throughout the planet that can definitely dispute that title, because everything is bigger in Texas, we're just going to consider that undisputable. The Houston metro area is absolutely massive with several skylines, one of the most incredible highway systems of anywhere in the United States. It really is a fascinating city to drive through. If you like urban landscapes, Houston, Texas will absolutely capture your imagination. The massiveness, the volume, the scale of this city and its highway systems and skylines are literally undefeated. Despite how iconic the main skyline of Houston, Texas is, scattered throughout the metropolitan area, there are several skylines. The vastness of the highway system here is literally unmatched. Houston really is the city of highways. Proudly, Interstate 10 goes east to west, dominating the east-west traffic through the center of the metropolitan area. At points coming close to the center of downtown, one of the most beautiful skylines of anywhere in the United States. Houston's skyline stands tall, beautiful, elegant. The buildings all different and contrasting. The blues, the blacks, so many shades of gray. The scale, the emerald colors, the shapes, everything about this skyline makes it a beautiful and marvelous sight to behold. Colors and shapes and configuration of the buildings in Houston skylines, wrapped beautifully by highways, makes it one of the most beautiful scenic interstate drives anywhere in the United States, where you can literally drive around downtown in a complete loop, just admiring the beauty of the skyline. A skyline that can be viewed from many different angles. A skyline that will leave you in awe at its massiveness, its beauty, and its absolute capturing and resilient presence. A skyline like no other. Whether you're looking at it in the night or in the day, from the many highway angles, the Houston skyline really is one of the most awe-inspiring sights of any American city, an urban landscape unlike no other. Underneath the buildings, the highways spaghetti themselves in all directions, opening path to residential neighborhoods like Houston's infamous Fifth Ward. Houston has beautiful, rich areas like the Woodlands, but it also has impoverished inner-city neighborhoods. Just like Los Angeles, any city this size will have its fair share of good and bad. Unfortunately for Texas' largest cities, it seems like property crime continues to be a huge concern. We leave Texas and enter Louisiana, a conjunction of traffic bottlenecks at the border of these two states, and we are now entering Louisiana, the land of the Cajun French Creole. Leaving behind arid landscapes, we are now in bayous and swamps. One of the longest stretches of bridge in the United States is again on Interstate 10 through Louisiana. You'll find yourself on this bridge for a considerably long path of many miles. As the terrain changes, so does the weather. You're now driving over alligators and alligator snapping turtles in a more moist, jungle-like setting, the bayous, the swamps of Louisiana. On Interstate 10, we're going to drive for 100 miles through rural Louisiana, seeing many rural landscapes, and you start to feel some eastern vibes. Flat terrain, green landscapes. You're now entering the eastern region of the United States. When you approach Baton Rouge, Louisiana, you are now crossing the mighty Mississippi River. The expansiveness of this river requires some of the tallest and most intimidating bridges you'll find anywhere on the North American continent. When you cross this bridge, you go from a completely vacant rural area and you find yourself in the heart of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, an impoverished southern city suffering with high percentages of poverty, extraordinarily high homicide rates, After all, Louisiana is the most dangerous state by homicide rate anywhere in the United States. The lawlessness spreads into the highways where people do highway takeovers and burnouts right on Interstate 10. The disrespect here of the people, allowing their hood rattery to spill over into the highway systems. Getting off at the exits here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is like entering another world. Poverty, misery, decay, all that surrounded by extraordinarily high crime rate neighborhoods. Violence and outright homicide is the only thing that prevails in these areas. Buildings have to close, decrepit, run down, graffitied out. This really is one of the most miserable and depressing settings you'll find anywhere along the stretch of Interstate 10 from one coast to the other. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the South, where life has no value and where crime reigns king. While Baton Rouge has always had a reputation of being a dangerous city, the larger city in the state, New Orleans, is also suffering greatly. We leave Baton Rouge, continue our journey on Interstate 10 eastbound, where we enter the outskirts of New Orleans. Currently, New Orleans is the 8th most dangerous city in the entire world. In 2022, with a homicide rate of 70 per 100,000, it was the deadliest city in the United States. While the skyline of Houston is colorful, vibrant, and beautiful, the buildings, structures, and skyline of New Orleans are depressing grays and just lacking color, lacking life itself. Depression abounds in what feels like an antiquated landscape. La madre que los parió a city. And here we find ourselves once again crossing the mighty Mississippi River, the river that brings contamination and garbage from all of the United States right through the heart of Louisiana, contaminating the Gulf of Mexico. Outside of the river's embankments are what is known as a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Sad and depressing, crime-ridden, New Orleans is still hosting a lot of tourists. The city has an incredible cuisine and culture. Most cities that have this much crime and just a depressing vibe would never attract tourists. But New Orleans continues to attract tourists because of its culinary cultural strength. Despite the fact that there are many challenges facing the city, tourists continue to come here because the city really is a unique cultural hub. Tourists overlook the crime and danger of the city and continue to flock year after year to the many events and times of the year when the city of New Orleans is full of life and population, bringing income, a city dependent on tourism. No other city in the United States plagued with this much crime and homicide has been able to continue holding on to their tourism industries. If you look at other cities that are as dangerous, Memphis, Detroit, St. Louis, these cities cannot captivate tourism. Somehow, New Orleans' cultural essence is so strong and so appealing that despite the many problems in this city, tourists continue to come here. Cities like Detroit, Baltimore could envy the fact that New Orleans, despite continuing to be a city of crime and death, tourists continue to come here. And that's how special the streets of New Orleans are. Despite all of the horrible things that happen here, there's something special and captivating about this city. On the streets and neighborhoods of the city, we enter the neighborhood of Hollygrove, where rap artist Lil Wayne grew up. New Orleans is a city limited by the geography of water, and it seems like many of the city's neighborhoods and streets are literally sinking. Perhaps it could be the landscape of New Orleans being surrounded by water, or perhaps the ineffective government and the city's segregation that has kept many of the poor black neighborhoods in disrepair. Whatever the cause, you'll find that in this region the roads are absolutely unbearable. We leave behind New Orleans and we head to Mobile, Alabama. Notice no mention of Mississippi. Despite Mardi Gras being associated more with New Orleans, it actually originated in Mobile, Alabama, but today, for most people celebrating Mardi Gras, it takes place in New Orleans. There's an interesting tunnel here that takes you through the heart of Mobile Bay underwater, Interstate 10 continues to give us surprises in how it weaves its way across America. Coming out of the other side, you'll find yourself in freaking Alabama. Somebody please get me out of here and take me back to Florida. Okay, we have to talk about Alabama. So in Baldwin County, on the eastern tip of Mobile Bay, is somewhat of a suburban and nicer part of Mobile. This region of southern Alabama is plagued again with homicide, crime, and poverty, but you'll find that Baldwin County, despite being in Alabama, shares many characteristics with places in Florida. We finally leave Alabama and enter the state of Florida. Pensacola is the first large city that you hit when you enter the state of Florida. Pensacola Beach, with places like Fort Pickens, are some of the most beautiful places in the entire state of Florida. Despite the beauty of Pensacola's beaches, with some of the whitest sand you'll see anywhere and clear emerald waters, and most people talk about the greatest beaches in Florida, Pensacola Beach always gets overlooked, but it really is one of the most beautiful stretches of beach anywhere in the state of Florida. Fort Pickens sits here. Now, if you guys may know, recently the National Park Service prevented people to record anything that's national parks for commercial purposes. Luckily, we had recorded these videos several years ago when I lived in Alabama, and thus these videos that we have here were recorded back then are not allowed to be used today for commercial purposes if it's a new recording, so we kind of got lucky there. I believe these were from 2021 when I lived in Alabama, and we went on a road trip to Pensacola to discover the beauty of this area. We discovered a beautiful coastline with some of the nicest sand, most beautiful water, and of course, almost nobody travels to this part of Florida. It seems like Pensacola really is overlooked as a tourist destination despite the beauty of the beaches here. And there is starting to be a lot of nightlife in downtown Pensacola as well. Downtown Pensacola has almost like a smaller version of a New Orleans vibe, and it has its own personal style. For some reason I don't understand, blasting music loudly from sound systems is the thing to do here. And as common in the South, there are a lot of regional subcultures within car culture, and here in this city, for some reason, people enjoy blasting music out of sound systems loudly. So with an active downtown, and of course, beautiful beaches, why does this region of Florida along Interstate 10 not attract anybody? We find our answer in the small and beautiful town of Milton. Despite this area being beautiful as well, you are nowhere near an international airport. Tourists cannot arrive here by airplane. On top of that, you'll notice that even the rural communities up here have a huge drug problem. Escambria County, where Pensacola sits, has the highest drug overdose death rate of anywhere in the state of Florida. That means that there's so many people addicted that it's a problem not only for the city, but even for the outskirts. Small towns like Milton, you'll see people piled up overdosing left and right. It's absolutely pathetic how bad it's got. We now enter Defuniak Springs. Along Interstate 10 are many small towns in this region of the Florida Panhandle. Defuniak Springs is a beautiful round lake with historic homes wrapped around it and a beautiful downtown. It's a small place, but if you're finding yourself along Interstate 10, it is definitely worth checking it out. Next door is a small, very small town of Ponce de Leon. Right off the interstate is a town that is so small, it almost feels like it's a staged little town. Literally just a few old buildings next to the railroad track. If you're coming along Interstate 10, it's worth getting off here and seeing this roadside attraction of what is in fact one of the cutest small little towns in Florida. Literally, this is it. It's very small, very tiny, and it's right off the highway. But we continue moving eastward towards Tallahassee, the state capital. We run into Marianna, Florida. This north-central region of the Florida Panhandle has a large African-American population. Some areas it's about 40%, other areas as much as 60%. And you'll notice here that the overdose death rate in this region of Florida is lower because the overdose death rate problem is predominantly affecting the rural white population. Thus, this region having a considerable African American population lowers the county's overall death rate. These are beautiful, rural, quiet communities, charming buildings, architecture, a slow speed of life, rolling hills. This is rural country, north central Florida. The towns are cute and charming, and the speed of life here is definitely a lot slower. We hit Tallahassee, the state's capital. This is a hip college town where young millennials come to learn, but predominantly to party. Tallahassee's speed of life and noise level is a lot more active and loud than the surrounding communities of the Florida Panhandle. It is, after all, a college town, and that comes with a lot of partying. Here, you start to see a little bit of Cuban influence in the cuisine. However, that is mostly reserved for southern Florida. We're starting to see many of the communities along Tallahassee, Live Oak, along Interstate 10 start to have a smaller percentage of Cuban population leaving South Florida for affordability and resettling in these rural communities. Tallahassee has a lot of students, many of which come from South Florida. Thus, despite Tallahassee being in the Florida Panhandle, it culturally has a few distinctive details of South Florida culture. For example, you'll see Cuban cuisine, the music, many of the styles of auto tuning as well. Just small little details that are mostly associated to South Florida. But because of the students being from all over the state, these cultural aspects work their way into Tallahassee. On the outskirts of Tallahassee, it's a small rural area known as Scotland, Florida. It's just a small rural community, but I wanted to feature it on today's video because of its natural beauty. It looks somewhat similar to what you would have in Alabama. The trees, the vegetation, everything seems like it's a slice of Alabama. And as you drive along Interstate 10, you're trailing Alabama, paralleling it. Then you parallel Georgia. This is the small town of Live Oak, Florida. The Hispanic community here has been growing. Many people from South Florida are coming here and trying to start a life in a more affordable rural town. As South Florida becomes expensive, many people can no longer afford it. And along this stretch of Interstate 10 from Tallahassee, Live Oak, Lake City, all the way into Jacksonville, you're starting to see a lot of people from South Florida relocate to these areas looking for affordability. And that comes businesses and many cultural aspects, as the people moving here are trying to invest in these communities. Small places like Live Oak are starting to see somewhat of a revival. Businesses investing in an area that was really dying. There's also a lot of chicken farms here that doesn't pay very well. Continue past Lake City, we find ourselves in Baldwin, Florida. Here, Florida's Highway 301 and the railroad intersect Highway 10 in the town of Baldwin. It's mostly an enclave of very happy rednecks. This town has improved greatly over the last few decades. Finally, the home stretch, Jacksonville, Florida. In downtown Jacksonville, Florida, Interstate 10 comes to an end, or it starts depending on how you look at it. Jacksonville, Florida is a city that is southern at heart. On the east side of the city, around the Arlington area, you're starting to see a lot of people from South Florida and Asian communities migrating here, changing what was once a black and white segregated southern city. There's still a long way to go for Jacksonville. Despite the influx of new people and military bases bringing some type of prosperity to the region, the city has a stronger job market than many other cities in Florida. It is still struggling to deal with its relics from the past. The fact that the city is still at heart a segregated southern city, despite the changing times, many of the longtime locals continue to hold on to many of things that are holding back much of America. Segregation, racism, and hate still prevails among the local population. But now you also have an influx of people from other places that are moving to Jacksonville, predominantly the outskirts, trying to make a new life for themselves. However, crime continues to plague this city. The legacies of the past are literally embedded in the cityscape of the city, which means that continually Jacksonville, despite all the good things that are happening, is having to deal with an incredible high homicide rate affecting predominantly the African American community. The youth in particular is absolutely dealing with a plague of crime, many of which is gang related. However, The city also has another problem: extraordinarily high overdose death rates affecting predominantly the white population. The combination of drugs destroying the white population and gangs destroying the African American youth means that Jacksonville continues to be a city on par with places like Birmingham and Montgomery. Still, it has a lot of the benefits of the state of Florida legislatively. Legislatively, Florida is a much better state than the states in the South. Jacksonville is literally in the state of Florida, but it is culturally more in line with the Deep South, and that holds Jacksonville back. Compared to Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Jacksonville is a piece of cake. But compared to the rest of Florida, there's a lot of progress to be made in this city, and many of the challenges that the city is facing come from the simple fact that the city was almost designed to be a racist place, and it's still struggling to this day to change that narrative. Jacksonville holds a strong culture to itself. It's a large city. It is the largest city in the entire state of Florida. And it's not just an urban scape of highways and railroad crossings and ports that make Jacksonville an important place. There's also something very special about Jacksonville. That Jacksonville has access to the Atlantic, and a beautiful stretch of the Atlantic coast at that. The beaches of Jacksonville are among some of the most beautiful in the entire state of Florida. Perhaps the water clarity isn't the best, but the expansiveness, something about Jacksonville Beach, the vibe, makes it a special place. This coastline of Jacksonville Beach is among the oldest settlements of anywhere in North America by Europeans. Predominantly the French and the Spanish laid claim to this area as far back as the 1400s, which means that the Spaniards had grandchildren in Florida before the English had friendly Turkey Day with friendly Indians in the Northeast. That right there gives this area a strong historical foundation, a foundation that to this day continues to shape the way people feel about this area. This is where the first European settlements of North America took place, allegedly, and that contributes to a lot of tourism along the coast of Jacksonville Beach, in particular the area of St. Augustine further to the south. These beaches of Jacksonville Beach are beautiful. Interstate 10 starts in California along beautiful beaches, and it ends in Florida as well with the same beautiful beaches. The vibe of Jacksonville Beach is a vibe all to its own. It's a place that really has its own feel, unlike anything else you'll find in any other American city. It's relaxed, it's southern, it's just a combination of many elements that make Jacksonville Beach have a feeling, a vibe that's unlike any other in any other city you'll see. It's very southern. It's very fun, but it's not as crazy as Miami. It's very touristy, but not as plastic as Orlando. In many ways, the uniqueness, the subtleness of the vibe and the environment that you have in Jacksonville Beach is just unique to itself. Difficult to describe a feeling. Jacksonville Beach is a favorite destination for a lot of the youth in Florida looking to enjoy a unique ambiance where I-10 comes to an end. And if I've struggled to describe Jacksonville Beach, it's because it really is difficult to describe this place. It's serene, it's quiet, it's enjoyable, it's peaceful. It has life, but it's never overwhelming. On the western end of Interstate 10, Santa Monica Beach, many people describe it as a very fake or plastic place. But here, where Interstate 10 comes to an end on the East Coast, you could describe the personalities of the people you meet as completely the opposite. Honest, genuine, and real. And that also shapes the place. Jacksonville, Florida is also a very important culinary city. It has some of the best barbecue of any large city in the United States. And that's not an overstatement, that's very accurate. The city of Jacksonville has a strong southern tie, and with that, it has some of the best barbecue of anywhere in America. Now, you're starting to see an influence of people from Miami and South Florida moving here, which means you're starting to find Latin restaurants, very good ones at that. Many great Cuban restaurants are starting to pop up all over Jacksonville. You're also starting to see one of the largest Asian populations in the entire state of Florida, giving this particular region of the state an emerging, growing scene of culture and food that's uniquely Jacksonville. There's also somewhat of a small Venezuelan community here. All that contributes to Jacksonville having enough diversity to be considered a place that has just about everything. Many of the problems that plague California with homelessness are definitely visible and persistent here in Jacksonville as well. And the overdose death rate here in Jacksonville is about 2 times higher than what you find in California. These are the types of analytics that you don't really hear on the media. Yes, California has a huge homeless problem, but Florida has an even more severe overdose death rate, affecting a lot of these beautiful cities like Pensacola and Jacksonville, and really holding back this entire region of northern Florida from being able to be as safe and comfortable and, well, just having the same standard of living as you would find in southern Florida. But along this trajectory through Interstate 10, we have seen mountains, we have seen deserts, we have seen swamps, and we have seen beaches on both coasts. And that is Interstate 10, a highway that connects the Sunbelt from one end to the other, beaches on both ends, and just about everything else in the middle. That is Interstate 10. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video.